Well, thank you for being here. Look at this. I thought the rain would kind of turn off the turnout, but this is terrific. Thank you for the fortitude. So let's get right to it. I've been an environmental photographer for 45 years. I started out being an adventure sports photographer when I left graduate school in geology, finished my master's, realized I wanted to be a photographer and not a scientist, so started in adventure sports, which were sort of my home province because I was a very avid mountaineer and backcountry skier and ice climber and rock climber back in the day. I still have done a lot of that stuff over the years, but now I'm too old to do a lot of it. My knees are kind of chewed up, so I just enjoy the photography more and beat myself up less. But anyway, I wanted to look at the world. I wanted to travel the world, and the focus of my personal work, as opposed to the assignments I did for magazines or advertising agencies or whatever, the focus of my personal work was about this intersection of people and nature. And the language I used in my head back in the day, not back in the day, but actually right up until the past year, is that there was a collision between people and nature. And I wanted to look at that. I could see that there was a big conflict going on as I perceived it at the time and through all the decades, and I wanted to expound and expand on that photographically and explore it. There's a lot of documentary-oriented photographers who have been photographing war for as long as cameras have been around, but there, I realized, was this other conflict that nobody was really looking at, which kind of amazed me when the light bulbs went off in my head. So I started looking at it. So the work here, in its own way, is catalyzed by Jane, who, as you all know, just passed away. She was a friend of mine on a personal level. That picture is of her with a corn snake around her arm. We were at a dinner at a mutual friend's house, and there was a snake in a terrarium, and Jane said, well, let's get the snake out. And she wrapped it around her neck, and there it is crawling down her arm, and that's Jane. But she was a big inspiration, I think, to me and to so many people who think about nature in modern culture, because she was so interested in penetrating the veil of illusion that separates us from nature. So a lot of what I've done has been inspired, in a sense, by her to penetrate that veil of illusion. I'm going to start with a trailer here from a film called The Human Element, which came out in 2018. And it kind of spans across a number of subject areas related to this intersection of people and nature, and I'll just let the pictures speak for themselves. You know, guys, the one thing we'd never figured out when we were doing the pre-screening was how we get some of the lights turned off. So let's cut these lights up here so you can see the color better. Leave the lights on in the back. Yeah, a little more. There we go. Okay, I can still see you. I think you can still see me. So, all right, that's good enough. So here we go. Film, we spent 4 years shooting, 2014 to 2017 and a half. It came out in 2018.
The state of California is resorting to drastic measures tonight.
The most severe conditions.
When I became a photographer, here we go, I wanted to celebrate the elegance and beauty of nature. But I soon realized there was a more complex story going on in the world.
Very powerful force of Mother Nature.
About the collision between people and nature. And I felt a great sense of urgency to bear witness to that. We need to get out of here because the water's rising around us.
As you can see, the water is just tearing it to pieces.
Front Range is still under an ozone action alert.
The majority of our kids are struggling with air.
In the United States, we have a fire problem.
The fire was huge and spread really fast.
These are wildfires we have no control over.
Little tornado right there. We depend on the stability of the fundamental forces of the world. Earth.
When you work in the mine, coal becomes part of you.
Air.
You're most definitely afraid of the air that you're breathing in.
Water.
Water and the folks on Tangier, we're joined, we're connected.
Fire.
Just respect it and maybe live a little longer.
And the fifth element, people. An imbalance in one element leads to an imbalance in another. People are the only elements that can choose to restore balance.
Good things come to people who hustle.
And that gives me hope.
We need the help and we need it pretty quick.
We're one storm away from becoming a part of history.
Our deeds are leaving their imprint in the fabric of time. And what I want to do is bring this story to life. As an ice and climate guy, I've photographed a lot of other subjects over the years, spanning fire, sea level rise, endangered wildlife, the great trees of America, deforestation, lots of different things. And I've become acutely aware that there is a parallel to the term plate tectonics. I assume many of you have an earth science background. You know what plate tectonics might be. The forces that move the continents around, build mountains, create volcanoes. And it dawned on me about 10 or 15 years ago that we need a parallel term to speak to the question of the force of humanity. Our needs, our population, our technology, our desire for, our needs for survival, our desires for the totems of affluence, all of that multiplied together creates this enormous force on the world that I call human tectonics. So that's what leads to this $50 science word, the Anthropocene. And for those of you who don't know, who aren't familiar with that term, it denotes the current period of time wherein the human race has become more or less a geologically powerful force on the planet. Depending on who's doing the counting, it could be said that the Anthropocene started with the dawn of agriculture 10,000 years ago. Maybe it started at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s. Maybe some people want to peg it at the dawn of the nuclear age. Others even want to put it at the dawn of the plastics age in the 60s. But for me, it's about, it doesn't matter when it started, because the term of our impact, our tremendous tectonic impact on the planet has been going on for a while, and it's been going on for a long, long time. You know, there were people 300,000 years ago who were altering the landscape around them using fire. So that's part of tectonic impact. So we're going to be digging into this today in 3 different subject areas: air, fire, and ice. And I use this purposely as a background because you can see how the surface of the land has been altered in the Anthropocene for the sake of agriculture. And agriculture has been a very, very powerful force across the soil and the rocks. So let's cut the lights again so we can see the pictures. Yeah, that's better. So I first got hooked on air in 1985. I happened to be at Cape Canaveral photographing one of the space shuttle launches. And I was standing here by the edge of the Indian River, and behind me, about 200 yards, was the viewing stand where all the visiting dignitaries were watching the launch. And naturally, I didn't want to shoot next to the bevy of other photographers with telephotos, so I wandered around and found this other picture of a sort I had never seen about these launches. And on the loudspeaker, the mission control guy was announcing how high the shuttle was. And so the shuttle takes off, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes. And the guy on the loudspeaker says, "It's 22 miles high, and it's turning downrange, headed for the Canary Islands." And I'm standing there, I can't, the picture, there's no picture that shows that, but I'm showing you the launch. So that as the guy announces 22 miles high, the shuttle turns at the top of the smoke column, and I can see it. I can see that silver flicker as this shuttle turns and shoots off towards the Canary Islands. And at that moment, I realized the atmosphere is a lot thinner than I ever imagined. Oh, sorry, what am I doing here? The atmosphere is a lot thinner than I ever imagined it was. And I want to someday maybe do something about that photographically. I'm not an astronaut, never will be, never would be, but maybe there's a picture in that somehow. So as I was working on the Human Element film in 2017, I was buying a new blue suit to go give a speech at the White House. And the woman who took my credit card at Nordstrom's looked at the credit card and said, "Oh, I know who you are. My husband needs to meet you." Her husband was a physicist for NOAA, and he put weather balloons up in the atmosphere several times a week. And so I met this fellow, Patrick Cullis, and it turned out that Patrick had been fiddling around hanging cameras off the weather balloons. And he said, "You can't believe how cool the pictures are when you turn on your time-lapse setting on the cameras, put the cameras up into space, and you can get into outer space with these weather balloons." So I said, "Okay, sign me up." So my little time-lapse cameras on Patrick's weather balloons were my surrogate astronaut eyes going into space. And I'm going to play a little clip from the Human Element film that shows you what our fiddling around meant. We're on Rocky Flats just outside Boulder. We're in that little hangar right there. What happened to our audio, guys? It is?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There goes.
You know, I've always known in theory that the envelope of air that surrounds us is thin. Yet, in fact, when I look up at the sky, it seems infinite.
Okay, so now I need you guys to walk away from me.
So I teamed up with a friend of
That's
mine
fine.
to send a camera up above the atmosphere
Keep going.
and experience how thin the air actually is.
2, 3,
Go.
Whoa, look at that.
It took only 25 minutes for that balloon to rise to what's basically the edge of the breathable atmosphere at 35,000 feet. How high is it?
It's 61,000 feet.
Wow. Just a few minutes later, it was up at 70,000 feet, staring out into the blackness of space.
99,000 feet. There's the parachute.
Oh, there's the camera.
It's amazing.
Cameras are in perfect condition.
Look at that. Continental divide. Fantastic.
In less than half an hour, my balloon had floated up into what was essentially outer space. I found it incredible that our layer of air is so thin. For the first time in my life, I understood how finite and precious the air is. How did the camera get back down to ground? There was a little 3-foot diameter plastic parachute that was tied to part of the balloon apparatus, And when the big balloon burst, the cameras fell at a terminal velocity, which was about 140 miles an hour, just fell like a stone. And the picture, it's shooting all the way down. The pictures are terrible because they're rattling and they're all blurred and everything. But eventually, the parachute gets down to where there's some molecules in the air. The parachute inflates, the thing slows down, and it comes down to Earth at about 15 miles an hour. And it happened to hit the only shrubbery that was out there in the prairie out towards Kansas, and it landed in the tree and never hit the ground. So we got real lucky. But this was my performance piece, my surrogate astronaut experience. That's what my little robot eyes saw looking out into space after literally half an hour of flight. That's how thin the atmosphere is. You don't need an astronaut to tell you that when the cameras are doing it for you. So I've been thinking a lot about air and about how it's the unifying substance that ties us into the great natural system. And I did a little bit of math here. So roughly we breathe 16 breaths a minute when we're not running around on bicycles or climbing up a hill. And in a day, I don't need to narrate these numbers, you can read it. It's each one of us, 8.5 million breaths per year. These are all for, and then the entire human race, those are all the breaths per year. And what that takes me to, maybe a little bit of poetic license here, but to this idea that we're part of Earth's lung. We're not separate from it, any more than the trees are on the ocean surfaces where there's exchanges of gas going back and forth. We're part of that system. And that was sort of mind-boggling to me. That was a revelation when I did that math and when we put that camera out into space and saw how thin the atmosphere is. So this connects to thinking about fire. And there's two different kinds of fire in the world. One is what some people call industrial fire. It could also be called synthetic fire. And the other one is wildfire, more or less natural fire. And we're all acutely aware of how burning fossil fuels puts stuff in the atmosphere, puts refuse, chemical refuse, residue in the atmosphere that pollutes the atmosphere and creates climate change. So I had to explore all these different dimensions of this subject. I wound up at the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and that's where this oil is from. I happened to be, this is a long story, I was going to the North Pole, and I was in northern Russia in Murmansk, and going out to the icebreaker that we were going on, and I looked down, and here was this railroad yard full of all the coal that they were digging up in the local coal beds and shipping to I don't know where. But oil and coal, those are the big fossil fuels. Now, I want to say very plainly, I don't say this with attitude. I say it humbly. I point out the reality of this. That man is my grandfather, Michael. And he lived in a little coal mining town in western Pennsylvania, and he spent 42 years digging coal out from underground. And my heritage, my opportunity to be here today is directly tied to what that guy did. And he got killed when the roof of the mine collapsed. So I'm humbly and acutely aware of how connected I am to that activity and that bloodline. And we all are. We're all connected in this process of using burnable material, whether it's firewood, natural gas, coal, or oil, to sustain our lives. I mean, the photons that are creating that picture came from somewhere where something's being burned, unless it happened to come from a wind turbine, a geothermal thing here at Cornell, or solar panels. But chances are it came from fossil fuels. We're all part of that system. And our job is not to criticize what happened or what's happening. It's to do the best we can in the circumstances and situation we have. That's the vein that he mined. Happens to be a surface expression of it. It's about 3.5 feet high. And this is what they were doing, burning the coal at this big power plant a few miles down the road. But by the way, let me go back. Two big parts of the Anthropocene right there: agriculture, burning schmutz and putting it in the air. I have a lot of unofficial, non-scientific terms when I do these things. Wildfire. It's the other big form of fire. Wildfires happen naturally, always have been, but as we all know, as the climate is drying out and it's getting hotter, it creates the conditions for wildfires to be more violent, to last longer, to burn more areas. And the wildfire season starts in the West anyway, much earlier than it used to, and it goes on a lot later than it used to. In my hometown of Boulder, we had a fire that burned 1,000 houses on New Year's Eve a few years ago, during the cold season when you're not supposed to have wildfires. And this thing got caught in a big windstorm and blown through all these houses. So the wildfires are now part of our lives. And in the Anthropocene, it's going to keep being part of our lives. Here in this part of the world, you don't have very flammable vegetation. It would be an unusual set of circumstances to get a big fire ripping through this landscape, but you're getting a lot of the smoke coming from the Canadian fires, as you all know. Part of the challenge for a lot of the work I do is, how do you find the beauty in these kind of wrenching situations? And there's always some navigating around the edges of things, trying to combine those two issues, the beauty along with what you need to say about it. We worked for 4 years on the fire lines, mostly in California. This guy in the orange suit is actually a convict in a state prison, and they put these convict crews out, and these guys are thrilled to pieces to get out of jail and run around on fires for $2 a day. They say it's way better than being in jail. And it's rough work, really, really difficult work, grueling, exhausting, very, very bad for the health because of what you're breathing in. This was a fire in 2010 that almost burned my own house down in the foothills of the Rockies in Boulder, but it got 160 some houses of my neighbors. This house was about half a mile away from ours. Big fire in California called the Sobranos fire in 2016. And this firefighter, Robert Reagan, he was actually a bulldozer operator, and he had just gone onto this ridgetop to blade a fire break around a house that was up there to try and save it. And as he came down, he went down this windy dirt road, and the road collapsed underneath his dozer. These things are heavy, of course. And the dozer tumbled down the side of the ravine. He survived that, got out of the dozer, and as he was standing there looking at it, the dozer fell over and crushed him, and he died. And so his fire crew came back and put up this crucifix in memorial to him on the site where the dozer rolled. And we wanted to have this as a memento of him in the film. And this is a whole other story I don't want to get into right now, but his ghost came back to visit a couple of the guys on the crew as we were shooting. And then the ghost came back a year and a half later when we premiered the film, and his wife and daughters were in Hollywood with us watching the premiere. Whole other story. One of the fire crew leaders that we worked with, 19 years old, her favorite sport was lifting weights and running so she could be ready for the frontline fireworks. She worked harder than any of the other 19 guys on that crew. She was tough. Which brings us to ice. So you make fires, whether they're artificial and industrial or they're wildfires, and you change the nature of the air is reacting to those events. And as the air gets hotter, ice melts. Everybody understands that. There's a very obvious and direct connection. So I've spent a lot of my life since 2005 looking at glacial landscapes changing as a consequence of evolving climate. Our work has taken me from Antarctica to the North Pole, from Alaska to the Himalaya, to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. It's been an amazing, magical mystery tour, and I just want to share some of the still pictures, the single frame still pictures celebrating the beauty of the landscape with you here at first. These are in Greenland. The Greenland ice sheet, when I was a little boy, I had a map on the wall of my bedroom, Moran's McNally map. And there was a big blank space where the Greenland ice sheet was. And I can remember standing in front of that map thinking, oh, I want to go there someday. I wonder what's in that blank space. And I figured it was just, an unbroken area of white. It isn't. There's thousands of square miles where it's rivers and lakes as the ice sheet is melting, and these streams are carving their way through the ice and flowing out to sea and raising sea level as the frozen water in the ice sheet gets transferred into melt and goes to the ocean. Air bubbles that were somewhere around 12,000 years old that were being released by the melting of the ice sheet. Air bubbles that were trapped in ancient snowstorms. That's the picture out in the hallway by the entry. Block by block, these glaciers that get smashed up become part of global sea level rise. They turn into smaller and smaller pieces, melt away, and once frozen ice on land becomes the ocean. This led to a series that we called ice diamonds because on this beach in Iceland where these glaciers blocks were getting smashed up, we would, go day after day and watch what the high tide threw up on the sand for our visual edification. And it was amazing, these unbelievably gorgeous sculptures of ice that time and nature and water and ice had created. The project started with a New Yorker assignment in 2005, turned into a National Geographic assignment in 2006. It was published in 2007. But I was frustrated with this story. When we were editing this story, I was thinking, now wait a minute, I'm dealing with time out there. The story is about time, this change of the ice that expresses climate change. I've got to show time somehow. And on our last day of editing, as I was walking from my hotel down to Geographic headquarters, this little light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, wait a minute, I should put time-lapse cameras out there, leave them behind, and let the time-lapse cameras click away and watch the landscape changing. And from that, 20 years of my life was changed. I got this idea at first that I would put 2 time-lapse cameras out. And then I got this idea, well, how hard can it be? Why don't I do 25? And we'll put these cameras in Alaska and some of the glaciers in Glacier National Park in Montana, in Greenland and Iceland, and we'll watch how those glaciers change. And we would bolt these things to the bedrock near the terminuses or termini of the glaciers and turn the cameras on. And they would shoot anywhere from, well, initially they would shoot every hour around the clock as long as it was daylight, and then we were able to shift them to every half hour. And they clicked away, over the years. The network expanded. I'll show you in a minute where it went. Lots of people worked on this with me. Very important parts of the team were way over there on that right-hand column. My wife, Suzanne, my daughter, Emily, and my daughter, Simone, who had their lives overrun by this project and were essential to helping make this whole thing happen. So that's what the time-lapse cameras looked like, parked on a ledge about 1,000 feet above the Columbia Glacier in Alaska. So I had to invent all this stuff. I thought that durable time-lapse cameras existed, but sort of flimsy recreational grade time-lapse cameras existed, at least at that time in 2007. So through a whole series of trials, developed this system where the cameras were housed inside these Pelican boxes, these hard shell plastic boxes. And there's a window cut into the front face of those so the cameras can look out. There's solar panels. You can barely see any, you can't even see one in this shot, but there's solar panels that are catching power from the sun, putting it through a battery, and then that goes up to the camera and feeds the camera. So this is where we had the cameras. It totaled out to be 72 time-lapse cameras by the time the project was done in the whole 15 years of the process. The orange sites are where we did what was called repeat photography. Actually, I did all of it. I would go back to the same places I had been before, kind of put my tripod on exactly the same rock, try and frame the picture exactly the same as it had been, and show what happened. So we didn't have to put the electronics out there. The electronics cost a lot of money. And it started to turn out that it was easier to do repeats than it was to do time-lapse. But nevertheless, we had both going on. We had actually 1.77 million frames. I misquoted this morning in one of the classes. There was 1.77 million frames that we shot, but a bunch of them, like 500,000 of them, were ruined by rain or ice or a camera malfunction. One of them was ruined when a volcano blew up in Iceland, and the volcanic ash blasted the glass that the camera had to look through. So the pictures were all wrecked from that series. But by the way, I should have it in here, and I guess I don't. The camera caught the ash cloud just as it was coming down over the frame, and it was about to choke off the glacier, and it turned black. But nevertheless, the project went on, the funding ran out, the energy ran out. It's a very, very, very long time to do a science-ish project. It's an artistic project first and foremost, but it's basically an extended science project of observation. And as all of you researchers know, science projects don't generally go on for more than 3 years with the grants. So we kept it going 5 times that length, and through philanthropic donations, kept the cameras alive. All the pictures are now stored in the National Snow and Ice Data Center, all of them. And Cornell has a set of about 450 that includes the ice as well as a lot of my fire work, endangered species work, tree work, and so on. I'm told that there may be an exhibition in the Olin Rare Books Room next year with it. The big archive of prints is at the Library of Congress, and so on. But since I started this project, this is what's happened to the world. CO2's gone up, temperatures have gone up, global ice loss, sea levels have risen. And so, in a way that's a testimony of frustration. We've shifted public opinion, but public opinion hasn't changed enough to do anything about those problems. The politics, the finances of things have been difficult, as we all know. So I want to show you a trailer from a film called Chasing Ice that we came out with in 2012, and this gives you some sense of what the field work looked like. Oh, what happened? Oh no. That should be working. I didn't click the right button, sorry, here we go.
I'm on the phone with Jim on one of our regular check-ins. Like, Jim, nothing's happening.
It's starting, Adam. I think. Adam, it's starting, right?
Look at that.
Look at the whole thing.
It all started in Iceland.
I think I'm so certain to get wet, I'll take my boots off.
I never imagined that you could see glaciers this big disappearing in such a short time. There's a powerful piece of history that's unfolding in these pictures, and I have to go back. The initial goal was to put out 25 cameras for 3 years, shoot every hour as long as it was daylight, that would show you how the landscape was changing.
Oh, this is the way to travel, my friend.
Putting really delicate electronics in the harshest conditions on the planet. It's not the nicest environment for technology.
I do not want to go any lower than this. It's just bottomless. I'm going out here on this broken fin, and I assume it won't collapse.
Every once in a while, I get saying, what were you thinking? Maybe that office job wasn't so bad.
This thing is loose.
Rock.
It's not working. God, all of that obsession means nothing if it doesn't work.
Just be careful. Don't get too close to the edge, all right?
This is terrifying.
This knee has had 2 surgeries, and it really could use a 3rd.
He goes to that point where he can't anymore, and sometimes he's going further.
We have low oil pressure on engine number 2.
This is big stuff happening right now.
Okay, onward.
This is the memory of the landscape. That landscape is gone. It may never be seen again in the history of civilization, and it's stored right here. So, here's what we saw through repeat photography first, and then I'll show you time-lapse second. History unfolding in front of your eyes. Actually, this is time-lapse, obviously. Truly, without the memory of the landscape, your brain could not absorb what was there and remember it. But the photographs give you this amazing mechanism for holding memory. And here's a time lapse of that same glacier looking down on it over the course of 15 years. The glaciers are thinning at the same time they're retreating. Now, let me pause that. So by 2008, I was realizing that there were these huge calving events, they're called CALVING. These pieces of the ocean terminating glacier would break off in a grand way into the ocean. You know, when you see those pictures on National Geographic Channel of pillars of ice toppling, those are calving events. And I realized that there was probably going to be a huge calving event at this big glacier in Greenland called the Ilulissat Glacier, which, by the way, is where the iceberg came from that sank the Titanic in 1912. But it was going to require camping by that glacier for an unknown number of days to get the springtime calving. So I coerced two of my young guys on the team into camping up there, being cold a lot, and sitting around until something happened. But this is what the camera saw after day number 17 came around. That wall of ice is 30 stories tall. This all happens in the course of an hour and a half. That berg that's floating up there on the right, that's 600 feet tall. Sense of scale, again, is very difficult, so we resort to cheesy illustrations. That block of ice was large. And here's the comparison to someplace you might know. And here's a comparison that we love to show in Washington. How many US Capitol buildings would have fit into that block of ice? And the magic answer is somewhere around 3,000. So this is not an abstraction. The ice is a long way away, but that water affects the coastlines all around this country, all around the rest of the world. The air affects all of us from the burning and the pollutants. Gets into the bloodstream. Some of the particles never go away. And I feel for our children and the people who will come onto this planet long after our children, who are inheriting a planet that's less than we should be giving them because of our consumption. And I'm going to end this little section with a series of pictures of a few kids. This girl had a terrible asthma problem from the polluted air in Denver. My daughter Emily holding a piece of one of the glaciers in Iceland. Sea level rise. The ocean levels will be way different in places like Norfolk, Virginia, and Chesapeake Bay when that girl is an adult. The sea levels are already flooding the streets and the homes in Norfolk right now. So I would like to very carefully choose my words. So I've written out some thoughts here that I'd like to read to you so I don't go off the reservation too much and I say exactly what I mean to say. So in answer to the question that was posed in the subtitle at the start of this show, what makes nature natural? It's you. We've been sold an idea for centuries that nature and humanity are two separate things. And to me, the story of the Anthropocene is that we are part of nature. There is no separation. So humanity has in fact been a tectonic force integral to the natural environment for eons. The cultural imprint of our Western civilization has blinded us to that fact. Ironically, it is in an open-eyed recognition of what's happening in the Anthropocene that opens the door to recognizing our union with the rest of nature. Our deeds, as I said in that trailer, our deeds are leaving their imprint in the fabric of time. An imbalance in one element leads to imbalances in the others. People are the only element that can choose to restore balance. The non-human parts of nature are indifferent to our denial, disinformation, ignorance, lobbying, and negotiation. Nature is impervious to the propaganda of corrupt interests in the corporate oligarchy. By now, it is no surprise that the authoritarian Trump regime, with its mafia-like cronyism, has a chokehold on the three branches of what had once been a democratic American government. It is a disaster for protection of the climate and the environment. They have eviscerated the mechanisms of knowledge like the National Science Foundation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they are working hard to dismember the fountains of knowledge called universities. A non-existent so-called national emergency has created spurious justifications for gutting the mechanisms by which our society has attempted to create a healthy, safe habitat for itself, like FEMA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and any number of projects that would have produced clean, green energy. Like so many of you, I can't help but teeter on a seesaw of optimism and pessimism about the future. But I simply refuse to descend into the doomsaying that's become so fashionable in environmental circles. I've taught myself with great care and discipline to hold optimism and pessimism at the same time. The net effect is that you could probably call me a cautiously optimistic eco-pragmatist. Yes, I can't help but get angry about environmental issues, and I'm sure that every person in this room does too. But unresolved anger tends to turn inward to despair and depression. Despair and depression accomplish nothing. Far better to consciously, willfully wrench that despair from the psyche, direct the anger and despair outward, and use it as fuel for positive action. That's what this building is all about. This is why I'm saying this here in this place. I've never read any of this before to a public audience. I find hope in the better angels of our technology, at least when we use it ethically and intelligently, which actually still happens sometimes. Hope in the love people have for their children. Hope in the pragmatic desire of humanity to endure. Hope in the inherent love the human soul has for blue sky, green leaves, and gleaming water. And hope in the power of nature's soul to regenerate. We the people have an inalienable right, not just to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but to clean air, clean water, and the security of a stable atmosphere. The quality of our survival demands it, our children deserve it, and the unknown billions of people who will inhabit this fair planet after us need it. May the wiser angels of nature help us fly to where we need to go. Thank you. Thank you.